Mushoku Tensei actively glorifies pedophilia. Ooh, we're going in hot. Mushoku Tensei is an anime based on a light novel by Refugin Namagano, which has been referred to as one of the progenitors of the modern isekai genre. It follows an unnamed 34-year-old otaku who is kicked out of his house by estranged family members and dies thinking he's wasted his life. But he's reincarnated with all of his memories as Rudius Greyrat, a baby in a fantasy world. Pretty standard isekai stuff so far, right? Is representative of general audience, goes to fantasy world, is an overpowered general creep in said fantasy world. That said, his creepiness factor is a bit higher than his contemporaries, which is a pretty fucking high bar. For example, one of the first things this show depicts Rudius doing is getting excited that he gets to touch his mother's breasts while breastfeeding. Which, yeah, but it's anime. Sexual harassment in anime is a lot like body odor at a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. It's everywhere and no one even knows how to start dealing with it, so you just try to cope. As Rudius gets older, he starts to make friends with people that are visually his age. And since this is an isekai, all these friends are girls. The problem is, these girls' ages range from 5 to 15. While his actual age ranges from 39 to 47. The age difference doesn't temper his sexual harassment either. Rudius actively lusts after a 5-year-old. He tries to sleep with a 12-year-old, and he does sleep with a 15-year-old. And did this blatant display of pedophilia get rejected by the general anime community? Huh, no. See, Mushoku Tensei is beautifully animated, which you can probably tell by the B-roll that I'm using. And it's well written if you ignore the sexualization of children. Rudius enters as a very accurate depiction of an otaku. Horny, socially inept, socially rejected, internally troubled. And the show does a very good job of building a character arc around Rudius coming to terms with and correcting a lot of his personal flaws. Legitimate talent went into this show, that is indisputable. And when compared to other isekai, any talent is noteworthy. This much seems to have been blinding, because even relatively based anime reviewers like Mother's Basement are out here bowing before Mushoku Tensei's ability to make cool explosion. I'm being a bit reductive. The YouTube anime community does recognize that Rudius is lecherous and gross. That he thinks of women as sexual objects, at least partially, through much of the show. But they cite that those thoughts are curbed. Here's Mother's Basement doing just that.
And working hard at it, seeing the women in his life do the same, is the main catalyst that spurs Rudy's growth as a character, and his growing respect for them, not as characters, but people.
Yes, Rudius's character arc does have him slowly addressing and fixing many of his flaws, and a gross view of sex is one of them. The problem is that many of the characters his gross view of sex is directed at are not women. They are children, and Rudius is not. Rudius is a full adult. He's mentally unaffected by being reborn as a child. He maintains all of his memories, personality traits, and experience from his previous 34 years of life. Rudius navigates social situations and manipulates people on multiple occasions in ways that a child could never do. When Rudius is 8, it's revealed that his father has gotten both his mother and their maid pregnant. This obviously drives a wedge between the three of them. However, worried about the ramifications, Rudius lies to shift the narrative from his father was cheating on his mother with the maid to, oh, his father was only raping the maid. Which, yeah, is pretty fucked, but the show treats this as an expert manipulation which shifts his mother's feelings from rage to pity and allows the family to return to a sense of normalcy. Other characters often comment on how mature or unique he is compared to other children. They think he's capable of accomplishing tasks that children just couldn't do. The narrative both shows and tells us that Rudius is not a child despite his appearance. Even Mother's Basement recognizes that Rudius is internally an adult.
Having an adult mind piloting his child body simply allows him to direct its innately accelerated learning ability.
But not visually, right? I mean, he looks like a kid. That visual distinction seems to be enough for the narrative and the reviewers. In a different section of Mother's Basement's video, where he goes over a scene in which Rudius tries to sleep with a 12-year-old, he says this:
I won't say it's the wrong directing choice, but I won't argue with anyone who thinks it is, or anyone who thinks addressing issues of consent like that with characters this young is flat out unacceptable.
Characters this young? Rudius is 44 in this scene. He's lived 44 years. He has 44 years of experience. He is not a young character. His visual youth is not enough to justify these actions. And by the way, anime is usually on the other side here. The show My Senpai is Annoying aired the exact same season as the second core of Mushoku Tensei. In this romantic comedy, a very young-looking but actually 23-year-old businesswoman is the main female lead. Now clearly, this woman looks very young. But canonically, she's an adult, so no one takes issue with her attempting a relationship with another adult. You cannot defend both of these shows. They are contrary to one another. One of them is a problem. Either age is experience or visuals. Personally, I'm gonna go with experience. Granted, I still find this show a bit sus visually, but on paper, it's in the right. You cannot say the same thing about Mushoku Tensei. So, now that we've established Rudius is an adult, that scene where Rudius tries to sleep with Eris while she's 12, he's rejected, which is good. It's a gross scene, but the show handles it as Rudius being in the wrong. However, Rudius's realization that he's being a creep is only in reference to his misunderstanding of consent and women, not to her being a child and thus completely unable to give consent in the first place. And as the show goes on, Rudius continues to be a bit of a perv by actively lusting over a 12 to 14-year-old. The narrative doesn't address or condemn this. Instead, it focuses on developing these characters and making Rudius realize that Eris is not a sexual object. She's a person that he wants to have sex with. And this culminates in him, at 47, sleeping with a 15-year-old. Yeah, he doesn't see her as an object anymore. This is a relatively tasteful sex scene between a 47 and 15-year-old. The narrative does not condemn this act. Now, people may argue that Eris leaving after was the condemnation. Her departure does depress Rudius, after all. But she doesn't leave because she's traumatized by the experience. She leaves because she wants to get stronger so she can defend him. She sees herself, the minor, as the one in the wrong, and then she screams from the mountaintops, "I love Rudius." And spoilers, in the light novel, he marries her, as well as another girl he's also grooming. These are not the qualities of a narrative depicting pedophilia negatively. But why do I phrase it like that? I'm a big strong man. Why do I need a narrative to tell me pedophilia is bad?
My, oh my, what a wonderful day.
You may have heard of a movie called Song of the South. It's a 1946 Disney movie that Disney has completely denounced. People call it racist. But why? The movie depicts happy slaves having a good time on their plantation, telling cheerful stories of animated creatures. Well, it's racist because slaves didn't have a good time on plantations. This is not critical of slavery, instead glorifying it by depicting it in a positive light. But it's not real. This is fantasy. How could something that's not real be pedophilic? Racist. And I'm not strawmanning here either. That's a real argument that people are making in defense of Mushoku Tensei. Here's GIGGUK, the most subscribed to anime video essayist, making the "it's not real" argument on stream after being questioned about his ranking of Mushoku Tensei as one of his top isekai.
I just like Mushoku Tensei because it's a good story. I acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of weird things and problematic aspects of the show, but I think that's fine. I think anyone who has a healthy degree of separation between real life and fantasy and a fantasy story can distinguish that.
Just because the media is fantasy does not mean that it's made or its messages exist within a fantasy world. The people that make media are influenced by the real world. The people that consume media influence the real world. The ideas that media present are based on its author's preconceived notions and experiences within the real world. And the messages media delivers alter the experiences and perceptions of the people that consume them. So, Song of the South is bad because its narrative belies racist ideologies within its authors about how slavery was not that bad, and it pushes a message of slavery being not that bad to those that consume it. Mushoku Tensei is bad because it belies ideologies within its author about pedophilia being not that bad, as we can see when characters are not traumatized by it and even react positively to a character that actively participates in it. And through that, pushes a message of it being not that bad to those that consume the media. This critical look at media is called content analysis, and you can even apply it to Mushoku Tensei with some positive results. Mushoku Tensei's depictions of sexual harassment, social ostracization, and self-betterment are all informed by and inform the real world. Many of the people who positively review this show cite its depiction of the main character's fucked up views on women, stemming from games and anime, as a valid parallel to the real world, and his efforts to correct them as valid and realistic depictions of a person seeking self-betterment.
Clearly, he is growing, but while not assaulting girls in their sleep is sadly progress for him, it's not even the bare minimum. He still has to unlearn a lot of bad assumptions about women and sex that he's built up through a lifelong diet of anime porn games.
So why does this analysis stop at the sexualization of children?
To me, I don't think it glorifies it, because to me, I was creeped out by it, okay? And to me, I think that if it really glorified it, then Rudy wouldn't it become slightly less horny as the series goes on.
It's great that GIGGUK was creeped out by it, honestly, but he's projecting that creeped out feeling onto the narrative. This is bad content analysis. The narrative does not agree with him. Yes, Rudius gets less horny. He doesn't sexually assault women as much, but the show literally ends with him at 47 sleeping with a 15-year-old. His pedophilia does not diminish, it objectively increases. And the only narrative reaction to this is Eris, the 15-year-old, feeling like she's the one in the wrong. But these are incredibly sensitive topics. What would a narrative that doesn't glorify them even look like? Well, let's look at BoJack Horseman. He's an incredibly flawed protagonist. He's an alcoholic, a drug addict. Every relationship he has is interwoven with some toxic or unhealthy social dynamic. And in Season 2, Episode 11, BoJack almost sleeps with a 17-year-old. Her mother finds them before anything happens, but it's left ambiguous whether or not he would have allowed it to go forward. And it does almost happen. But BoJack Horseman does not glorify this scene, or any of BoJack's negative traits. The entire show is about him fighting against his worst qualities, and every time he relapses, he drives wedges further and further between himself, his friends, and any potential for happiness. The next time BoJack sees Penny, the 17-year-old, she's traumatized by what happened, and rightfully calls him out on his predatory behavior. The entire show of BoJack Horseman culminates in him finally reaching a state of contentment, only for this incident with Penny and others that he'd been running from, catching up to him and ruining his life all over again. These are the qualities of a narrative exploring the darker elements of the human condition without actively glorifying them. But Mushoku Tensei will never do this. It's too obsessed with funneling power and prestige and affection onto this audience self-insert to ever fully denounce the crimes Rudius has committed. And in so doing, it's glorifying them. How do I know the narrative will never do this? Well, in episode 4, Rudius explicitly states that he plans to groom Sylphie. And in the light novel, he marries her, as well as Eris, who he's also grooming. If the narrative was against grooming, then why is he ultimately successful? I mean, what, are you gonna try to tell me that he's the villain?
Fucking Vegeta tried to blow up a whole fucking planet, and people fucking love him! Why do they love him? Because he had a redemption arc. You know, did we just fucking forget that Vegeta literally tried to blow up the fucking Earth and people were just like, what a guy. What a guy.
Yeah, let's talk about villains and Vegeta. Why did he need that redemption arc? Because he was a villain when he was blowing up planets and killing people. Dragon Ball actively shows characters calling him a monster for his actions. The narrative is so against Vegeta that he needed hundreds of episodes of redemption arc to turn him into a face. Rudius does not have characters calling him a monster, or even disliking him. Any main character that starts to dislike Rudius is quickly brought back to the party line. Everyone in this show loves Rudius. He doesn't have a villain arc, he's repeatedly betrayed and heralded as a hero. And he definitely doesn't have a redemption arc, because this show literally ends with him sleeping with a 15-year-old. Above all, there's this pervasive statement by Mushoku Tensei's supporters that it's totally okay if this show is just too edgy for you.
Still, I can't blame anyone who just nopes the fuck out of the whole thing the second it starts before seeing where they're going with it. It is hard to recommend watching.
You know, if you can't handle some of the scenes in this show, we totally get it.
People who get put off by the stuff that Rudy does, I've never had a more understandable have a nice day moment in my life.
But at its core, it's a good show.
I've definitely found my own viewing experience to be profoundly worthwhile.
A good story.
I think it's an amazing show. I think that there are a lot of amazing things about this show that is not just that one problematic and one really weird thing.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, fam. I would say that a narrative that actively promotes pedophilia is intrinsically flawed. It's a bad narrative, objectively. But maybe I'm alone in thinking that. Fuck, that's depressing.